Hi, I'm Wayne Reeves. For 12 years, I was Chief Curator for the City of Toronto. But long before that, in fact, for 35 years, I've been researching and writing about Toronto history in many different aspects. And what I want to do through these sessions with Backlane Studios is share some of my findings on how to become a better Toronto history researcher. So we're going to start by looking at Toronto photographs. And the goals today, you'll learn about finding Toronto photographs in public collections, and you'll also get tips on dating photographs that you come across. Backlane Studios set out a research challenge for me, looking for a photo of the Midtown Bakery at 586 Bloor Street West in Toronto, run by Max and Frida Krebs, and hopefully finding a photo that dated about 1980. So, with any research project on the photo front, I start with specific search terms, and then more importantly, I move to a more general search parameter. And that's why you'll see in this presentation, anytime that there's three asterisks, these are really crucial points that you'll want to pay attention to as part of your research project. So, photo focused searching. When I say start with specific search terms, these seem to be kind of obvious. So you're looking for the property, the business, or the event name, in this case, Midtown Bakery, any people that are associated that need to be searched, both Max and Frida Krebs in this instance, the specific address, a date, or a narrow date range. But then you'll want to broaden out your search. Look for a more generalized location. So this could be a street name like Bloor West, a nearby street intersection, in this case, Bloor Markham, Bloor Bathurst, adjacent street addresses, 582, 584, 588, 590 Bloor West, and finally, a neighborhood name if you have it, in this case, Seton Village. You can also generalize your search by searching by business type, in this case, Toronto bakeries, or you could even widen the date range much further. In this case, I was checking into sources that range from 1934 to 1995 because there were actually a series of bakeries at 586 Bloor that included, for a short time, the Midtown. Throughout today's presentation, I'm going to be sharing some actual research projects that I've been involved with to give you some examples of concrete searches. In this case, my research target was a loft building, a light industrial structure at 8690 Chestnut Street in Toronto. When I plugged in that address, a specific search term, I got zero results of the Toronto archives. But when I broadened out my search to a more general term, Chestnut Street, as well as the date range of 1913 to 1915, I got a church at 94 Chestnut Street. And so in this photo, the church is in the middle of the image, but my target property is on the left-hand side of the photo. Exactly what I wanted. You'll also want to search inside primary and secondary sources for photos. Primary sources are sources that deal with raw data, like census information, or first-hand accounts. Secondary sources deal with massage data or commentaries, analyses, and what have you. Think of it as if I did a memoir about my life growing up in Downsview, that would be a primary source. But if you decided to write a biography about my childhood in Downsview, you would be generating a secondary source. So I also mentioned as a primary source census information. A secondary source would be taking that census information and say creating, well, based on this demographic data, um, immigrants were a really important source of economic growth in Toronto in the 1910s. That again is a secondary source. So the sources can be books, newspapers, magazines, reports, pamphlets, and other ephemera. They could be recently published, they could be very old. They could be found online or something you actually hold, something physical. And critically, many images are not found anywhere else as freestanding items. In other words, things that I've come across and that you may come across in books and other primary sources may not show up in photo collections. And these images that you find as part of your research may lead to archival sources if citations are given. And this is why when you're creating articles or books or even online publications, try to cite where your images come from so that other researchers can trace back your sources. Here's an example related to that loft building that I was telling you about at 8690 Chestnut Street. It was owned by Henry Griezmann, and he was the guy who not only owned the property, but built the building. The only place where I was able to find an image of Henry was in this book, The Jew in Canada, published in 1926. And you'll see down at the lower left-hand corner of the screen a circa warning. These are going to pop up throughout my presentation. And they're little warnings about how to engage with the sources that you come across. So in this case, the publication date cannot be equated with the date of the photo. So here, 1926, the publication date is the latest possible date for this photo of Henry. And so you would best cite this finding as circa 1926. And how do I know this? When I went through the book, The Jew in Canada, I found many images of other people who died long before 1926. And so those photos and paintings and sketches had to be created at an earlier date, but the book did not cite when those images were made. And that's why circa 1926 is a much more reliable way of citing the source. The two great archival sources for researching freestanding Toronto photos are the City of Toronto Archives and the Toronto Public Library. But there are many other sources with Toronto material. Some of my favorites, York University Archives, the Archives of Ontario, Library and Archives Canada up in Ottawa, and even, strangely enough, offshore locations like the US Library of Congress, which holds a lot of really interesting Toronto material, images from the early 20th century. And there are many, many others. In fact, there's about 100 archives that have been identified in the Toronto area. Many are very specialized. In other words, they're linked to certain specific religious institutions or ethno-racial groups. And you'll encounter some of these as part of my presentation today. We'll begin by looking at how you search the Toronto Archives holdings. Now, here's a URL, and it looks kind of complicated, but you can basically just open up your internet browser and type in the word City of Toronto Archives, and that should lead you to their webpage. Now, today's presentation isn't just going to be on YouTube. It's also going to be available on the Backlane Studios webpage as a PDF, so you can link directly to these web sources and follow along at your leisure with some of the searching techniques I'm going to show you. So what does the Toronto Archives have? Well, it was really set up to hold local government records related to the City of Toronto, but it has many other non-governmental records as well as tons of photos, maps, architectural plans, directories, assessment rolls, building permits, lots of other things. And the online access provided through the City of Toronto's catalog takes you to scanned or online items as well as critically unscanned items. Let's take a look at how you navigate the website. And this is probably true of every archival institution that you're going to encounter. You'll want to start by taking a tutorial or learning how to do a basic search or an advanced search even before you dive into the database. This will make your search much more efficient because you'll know how to use terminology as well as different characters that will assist in your researching process. So once I've familiarized myself on how you do a search and how you use the database, I clicked on Search the Archives and it brought me to this page. I typed on the keyword 586 Blur, so a very, very specific search. And then I checked off the box that says online scan records only. I hit the search button and I got absolutely no results. Your search did not match any records in our database. Please adjust your search criteria and try again. Okay, so adjusting that search criteria, I did it by going more general. And I did this by using the intersection, Blue or Markham. And here you can see how I did two different searches. One, by checking that box to produce all online records, and then leaving that box unchecked. And what did this generate? Well, for the online records, I got 21 results, and for all records, I got 54 results. So the scan records turned out to produce lots of photos of honest heads in Mervis Village, but nothing for 586 Bloor West. Things got a lot more successful, or so it appeared, when I searched for all records. So that's the scanned items and everything else that has not yet been scanned. It generated 5 promising files. And I guess I really should say here that there's only a fraction of any archival institution's holdings that have ever been scanned or probably ever will be scanned. And this is simply a matter of resources. So typically, you might have a photo archive with 2 million records, but maybe 5% or less have been scanned to date. So, what did I do with these 5 records that were produced? I opened up each one of them to find a little bit more about the cataloging. And again, this looked very, very promising. This one file, Bloor Street Views between Markham Street and Ossington Avenue, which would have covered 586 Bloor West, contains 21 photo prints and 21 photo negatives. I think I want that. So how do I get it? You save to list. So you click on that button underneath the record. And once you've clicked on all the items that you're interested in, go to the top banner and click View List. And from there, you're going to take that option of creating a records request form. And what did it produce? It produced a PDF, which is shown on the lower right of this page. Okay, so on the left, here's a close-up of the PDF. It has some information about the record. It has a barcode so that City Archive staff can find exactly where it is in the city. Some records are held on site at the Record Center at 255 Spadina Road. Some records are held off-site. So what do? You save the record request form to your drive, and then you attach it and email it to archives@toronto.ca. And when you send off that email request, be sure to indicate when you want to visit the archives to review your files. I'd like to leave about 1 to 2 days grace period, knowing that some records take that long to retrieve if they're stored off-site. And I've provided here contact information about where the archives is located, as well as their current hours as of March 2025. What happened when these records got called up? Well, the upper left-hand corner of this slide shows me arriving at the archives. My 5 files were in 3 boxes. I wheeled the cart over to a research desk, and then, using good archival practice, I took 1 box off the cart at a time. I took 1 folder out of the box at a time. I made sure that I had cotton gloves available in case I had to pull the photos out of their plastic sleeves to reduce glare. And I also made sure that I had a pencil with me. And there will be some available also at the city archives. But this is because no pens are allowed in the research hall. They don't want any permanent marking of their records. So what happened with my findings? Well, it turned out that the records all had been generated by the TTC as part of building the brand new Bloor Danforth subway line in the 1960s. And what they were documenting were not the storefronts on Bloor Street West, but the right of way that had been cleared to make way for the new subway line. So everything was north of Bloor Street, not on Bloor Street. But I did get to look at some really cool images of what motor vehicles look like in Toronto in the early 1960s. So all that was done by using the basic search, which is the default on the web interface. If I had clicked on the advanced search, it would have brought me to this page, and it can be very, very useful. This is in fact what I use to narrow down my search for Chestnut Street. So I entered in that keyword, I entered in the date, and I made sure that the type of media that I wanted to look at was only photographs. I was not interested in textual records or architectural plans or anything like that. Um, I've circled here the help button because that button will give you a guide on how to construct your search terms. And it's really important in terms of if you want to search for a date range, it will show you that dot, 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 or ellipses between 1913 and 1915 will search all the records between those two bracketing dates. And once again, I decided to do a quick expedient search by only producing the online records. And that's with that blue check mark. Well, I checked that and it produced the image of the church that I showed you a couple of slides ago. Okay, how about searching the Toronto Public Library's digitized holdings? So once again, here's the URL. But when you're in your web browser, if you type in Toronto Digital Archive, it will take you to that homepage. And there's many different types of materials. There's paintings, photos, ephemera like handbills and fans and advertising material, as well as maps, books, and directories. So when I typed in 586 Bloor West, well, I've been using that specific search term, no results were found. So I moved to a more generalized search. Bloor Markham, 6 results. Toronto description and travel, 119 results, so on and so forth. And I'll explain in a minute why I use some of those general search terms. The key thing to remember is when you're looking at what's in the digital archive for the TPL, everything can be viewed in person, usually at the Toronto Reference Library. So if you see something that's only available with a low resolution image, and you think that you might be able to get a magnifying glass and hone in on aspects of a photo or a map, um, simply go to the Toronto Reference Library and ask how you can see the physical image. So here on this screen, I've shown that yes, from the Toronto Public Library's homepage, you can also reach the digital archive. Um, on the homepage banner, you select e-resources and research, and then click on digital archive, and that will take you to those online images. So when I typed in Blue or Markham, I didn't get any specific results for 586 Bloor, but I did get 6 results for the neighborhood. And of course, several of them pertain to honest ads. So here's an image from 1982 um, showing the corner of Bloor and Bathurst at night. I mentioned Toronto description and travel. And again, this is a really powerful way of searching for images within books and other publications. Now, you can refine your results, and this is really important. You can narrow down your date range. You can search by neighborhood. You can search by North-South Street, East-West Street. So even if you produce a lot of results very quickly, when you open up um, uh, this search functionality on the left-hand side, you can narrow your results very, very quickly. And so what are some of the things that you can pull up once you search by Toronto description and travel? Here we see Toronto in the camera, a series of photographic views of the principal buildings in the city of Toronto. This is the very first book of photographs ever published about Toronto. Octavius Thompson, 1868. He's actually the photographer and the publisher. And why I was interested in this publication was when I was doing some research on 19th century street signs in the city. This is an image of St. Lawrence Hall, the grandest civic building in Toronto at the time, built 1850. And by 1868, some people might have viewed this as a disfiguring approach where Graham's Temple of Fashions hung some painted signboards on the face of the building. In another publication published for a Geological Congress in 1913, brought me to this image while I was doing some research on Toronto street lighting. And what I've circled is actually a Bierstein style of streetlight that became popular after Toronto Hydro, the public utility, was created in 1911. And this is how residential streets were lit up for many, many years. And in fact, if you go to the neighborhood known as Wychwood Park, which is actually a set of private streets in the city, you can still see some of these Bierstein light standards. Another research project took me to East Toronto to look at a tailor named John Simon. And this is the only image I was able to find of Simon and his business. And it was actually held within a really laboriously titled souvenir publication from 1918 called Commercial, Industrial, and Progressive Edition of East Toronto, the Beaches, and Surrounding Busy Districts, Greater Toronto, Ontario. A descriptive review of a number of mercantile and manufacturing interests located in East Toronto, the Beaches, and surrounding districts. Da 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 da. So again, pull up some of these publications because they may have really interesting images that you can't find anywhere else. Now, you will find items that, in fact, are no longer subject to copyright restrictions. And that's why you won't find in that digital archive books that were published, for example, over the past 50 years, except for the TPL's own publications. And in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the TPL created a number of picture books about Toronto neighborhoods. And I want to show you this one image drawn from the Beach and Pictures because it has circled this weird set of letters and numbers along the right-hand side of the image of Woodbine Beach. THC PC 1-1-1148. That actually is the archival citation, the accession number for this image. And the question is, well, where's it from? Well, at the beginning of the book, there's a key to abbreviations, and THC stands for Toronto Harbor Commission. And what's important here is sometimes institutions change their names. The THC is now Ports Toronto. So online, you would want to search for Ports Toronto or Ports Toronto Archive to find out how you can access this image in Toronto at the Ports Toronto headquarters. Another book published by the TPL looked at Scarborough through the eyes of one photographer, George W.J. Duncan. And I was really taken by this one image of a privy, an outdoor toilet behind a church on Passmore Avenue in Scarborough. And Duncan made this note. Since this picture was taken, the privy has been removed. The church still stands. So again, this is another example of a unique item only found within a publication. I haven't been able to find this photo in any archival collection. So again, it's really important as part of your photo research to look at published materials. Toronto Pictorial Works is another great search term to use because pictorial works are by definition image rich. And this is one of the ways where you can quickly get to that book that I showed you earlier, Toronto and the Camera, the first photo book about Toronto. The Toronto Public Library also provides links to online newspapers. And these online newspapers are not accessed through the digital archive. You have to find them through the homepage for the TPL. And you'll link to two online newspapers with your TPL card. The Globe and Mail, running from 1844 to 2020, and the Toronto Star, running from 1894 to 2021. And it's good to know that many newspapers are held by the TPL and they're only available in person on microfilm in the basement of the Toronto Reference Library. So here's a case where from the TPL's homepage, I typed in the search term Globe and Mail, and it immediately brought me to this link. Globe and Mail, Historical Newspaper Archive, Access Online. Before you hit that Access Online button, use the video tutorial link. Again, this will make your searching much more productive and much more efficient once you've hit the red button. And this was a case where I was doing research about the opening of Maple Leaf Gardens in 1931. So on the upper right-hand side of the screen, you can see the Globe and Mail's front page of the newspaper edition that trumpeted the ceremony related to Maple Leaf Gardens in 1931. And again, images that I haven't been able to find anywhere else were located in this online source. Now, questions have come up. Man, these images that I see online are really, really grainy. How can I get a better image? And so, really, two ways. Firstly, these images may be available elsewhere in a photo archive, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But if you can't find them anywhere else, the TPL holds hard copies of these newspapers. So you may be able to request a reproduction based on the date and page number and attaching, just like I've done here, a circling of the image you're specifically interested in on a specific page. There are other online sources for books, magazines, and newspapers that contain Toronto photos. And I've found over the years three really great sources: Canadiana Online, the Internet Archive, and Hathi Trust. And I've provided links to each of these. Now, as an example, I was really interested in the Don Valley Brickworks. And online, on the Canadiana Online Database for Construction Magazine in 1912, I found this great spread of a panorama of downtown Toronto, annotated with all the buildings that use Don Valley Brickworks bricks. And so once again, the image looks grainy. Where can I get a better image of this? Well, Construction the magazine is actually held by the Toronto Public Library. So if you go to the Toronto Reference Library, you can actually call up the physical magazine and request that a reproduction be made. Now, photos in newspapers versus newspaper photo collections. I touched on this just a moment ago. For any topic and date, a newspaper may or may not have a photo of it. Okay. But one or more may be in a related newspaper photo collection. And this is because when news photographers are sent out on a job to document an event, not always their images will actually appear in the physical newspaper. Um, and I've got an example here. So, in 1934, prohibition in Ontario came to an end. So, in other words, alcohol sales were permitted. And for a research project, I wanted to see how this was marked in Toronto hotels and taverns. So down in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, you'll see a catalog record at the Toronto Archives, beer sale seen in Walker House. And the date looks right, July 24th, 1934, the day that prohibition ended. Now, at the same time, I'd looked in the Globe and Mail around July 24th, and I went a week later after that date, and I couldn't find uh, this image relating to the Walker House. But when I actually called up the image at the city archives, I actually found and was able to get a reproduction, which is illustrated here. So the other caveat that I have here, for any topic and date, a photo in a newspaper may not be in a newspaper photo collection. What does that mean? Simply that not all photos can be found. Some were not saved, some were lost or misplaced, some may even have been stolen by who knows. But again, there's not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence between what you find in a newspaper and what you find uh, as a freestanding item in an archive. And where do you find these photo collections for newspapers? I've listed five great sources. Three pertain to the Globe and Mail, so the City Archives, York University Archives, Archives of Ontario, and Library and Archives Canada. Sorry, let me correct that. Toronto Telegram is found at York University. And then the Toronto Star is found at the Toronto Public Library. And again, I need to underscore the fact the TPL holds the Toronto Star Archive for the 20th century. Over 2 million items, just over 100 and 30,000 items have been scanned to date. So again, that says we need other ways of seeing what's in that archive. And I'll get into that in a minute. Now, searching the TPL's physical holdings. So once again, you'll go to the homepage of the TPL, and here you're searching for books, magazines, newspapers, maps, what have you. And using those specific search terms, Midtown Bakery, 586 Bloor, well, even Bloor Markup didn't produce anything. But I typed in more general search terms and I found things related to Toronto Jews history, Toronto bakeries, and some very general search term that we've encountered before. Toronto description travel, Toronto pictorial history, or sorry, pictorial works, and Toronto history. And when you find things online, you'll find that many reference-only items can only be seen in person at the Toronto Reference Library. Now, some items are also held elsewhere at the old pre-amalgamation municipal central branches. And a good example of this is the North York Central Library. You may also find, if they're historical works, they'll be at your neighborhood TPL branches. With a Toronto Public Library card, some items can be ordered via placehold, and you can pick them up at your local branch library. So here's an example right here. Once I've entered my TPL card number and my password, uh, I can place the hold, and often within just a few days, for many items, you'll get a notice email from the TPL that your item's locally available. For some items, and this book is an example of it, you can actually access them online. Okay, so there's been arrangements made to look at digitized materials. These tend to be quite recently published materials. And again, the ebooks can be viewed right from the comfort of your laptop, your mobile device, your tablet, or whatever. Okay, so again, using the search term Toronto Pictorial Works, when I just typed that in, I got 811 results, but I wanted to narrow things down. So the key thing here is to click on the advanced search link. And once you're in the advanced search window, you're going to have to retype in the search term Toronto Pictorial Works. And then you're able to narrow your search focus down to something that's a bit more palatable. In this case, I typed in the year range 1945 to 1990, and suddenly I'd reduce my search results from 811 to 249. Much more manageable, I think. And so, what exactly are these Toronto pictorial works? Well, I'm going to use some examples from the last, 60 odd years or so. What's really critical is the surge in Toronto pictorial works from 1970 onwards. And part of this was generated by local history guy Mike Filey. He created many, many picture books about the city he lived and loved, starting in 1970 and continuing with his last publication in 2019. And what Filey would do was he would acquire photos. Sometimes he would buy them at garage sales or auction houses or flea markets, or he would acquire reproductions or copy prints from different archival sources, put them into books, and provide very rich captions that will assist your researching. There are many of these now available. Some of them are about specific Toronto photographers, in this case, William James, who worked early in the 20th century. Some of them may have a fairly date range. Here is a book about general views of Toronto from the 1920s and 1930s. Some may be more thematic. Sally Gibson's book about Toronto interiors is a research of information about people's houses, workplaces, factories, what have you, within a date range ranging from about 1880 to 1930. Finally, also for Toronto, created the what I will call the then and now history book, history picture book. So in 1971, Look at Us Now would pair up old photographs with newly shot contemporary images of the same location. And in this case, it's Bay and Queen Street in 1914 and 1971. If you go to this corner today, it doesn't look like that at all. The building has been recently reclad, and so you could actually pair these two images up with a third image from 2025 to create a really broader time series view of that intersection. There are also other sources of then and now picture books. Two of my favorite, in fact, there's a pair created by Gordon Jarrett, 1969 and 1973. What he did was he actually shot oblique aerial photographs of this general location, separated by 15 to 20 years of time. So on the left-hand side, you see an image of what is now York University, or sorry, what was York University in 1973, and above it, an image of Farmers Fields from 1958. And in his two books, published in 69 and 73, he does a pretty good tracking from the downtown core to the outer suburbs of Toronto. Another great resource is the work of Patrick Cummins, Full Frontal TO, a book of photographs where Cummins went out year after year and shot the same properties head on. And so down below, we have a time series of 515 Queen West, running from 1984 through to 2011, and shows again the outcomes of the process of urban change. This slide is simply to underscore that picture books have been created time and time again over the last 6 years or so. I mentioned 1868, the first book of Toronto photographs by a single Toronto photographer. That wasn't done again until 1960 when Ralph Greenhill published The Face of Toronto. So it's a really interesting view of Toronto after the Second World War. There are many other pictorial works, and as I went through them looking for the Midtown Bakery at 586 Bloor, I found a lot of images of Honest Ed's and Mirvish Village. Nothing specific to 586, unfortunately. But it did give me a flavor of Toronto in different decades. And this is another reason why you should look at pictorial works. If you're writing about the 1970s, immerse yourself in these image-rich publications that will reveal much about the cars and bikes that were on the streets, the look of storefronts, what people wore, how much they smoked, what the city looked at like during the daytime as well as during the nighttime. I want to drill in to the TPL's website to talk a little bit more about image research. So, if you go to their homepage and you click on e-sources and research, you can scroll down into their special collection section and then click on special collections and rare books. And once you've done that, scroll down further to the Marilyn and Charles Bailey Special Collection Center. So you scroll down to that section and then click on Baldwin Collection of Canadiana. Once you've clicked on Baldwin Collection of Canadiana, scroll down to collection details and highlights. And when you see Canadian Documentary Art Collection, open up that section. Once you've opened up that section, you'll see the text on the right-hand side. And there's two key things here. The first, Toronto Star Photograph Archive. And there you will find two finding aids to those 2 million images that I mentioned that are in the newspaper archive held by the TPL. So again, relatively few of the images in the collection have been scanned and are available in the digital archive, but hopefully you can find more of what you want by dipping into these finding aids. And when you click on they're Google Docs, but they really function like Excel spreadsheets. And so it has all that searching functionality that you get if you're familiar with using Excel. But there's something else that you should know about if you want to find out about Toronto photos in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you back out to that collection details and highlights page, you'll see other holdings. And in that other holdings section, under the second bullet point, you'll see the Donald H. Ritchie collection. And it says digitize items and finding aid available. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Ritchie collection. It's all about Toronto streetscapes. 21,500 odd negatives from the 60s through the 80s. But as of March 2025, only 31 have been scanned to the digital archive. So how else can you find about what's in this collection? So you're going to want to click onto the finding aid, and there's an image on the right side of this slide of what you're going to find. It's a PDF. So you're going to have to scroll, not search by doing Control F. You need to scroll down to find the streets and intersections that interest you. And once you've done that, jot down the contact sheet numbers and then visit the Bailey Collection Center, fifth floor, Toronto Reference Library here in the city, and ask for the contact sheets that you're interested in. And at the same time you put in your request for those contact sheets, ask to borrow magnifying glass because the images are pretty small on those contact sheets. And you'll find on those contact sheets, if you turn them over, the specific negative numbers are on the back. I'm going to walk you through all this. So again, on the right-hand side, there's a little introduction when you open up that PDF finding aid. So I've scrolled down to Bloor Street West, and you'll notice it doesn't say near Markham. So near Bathurst is actually the last general intersection. And you're going to say, well, Wayne, what happens if I search Markham Street? And the answer is you would basically get the same results because the way that Ritchie set up the finding aid, you could search in several different ways for street intersections. So Bloor, Bathurst, Markham, Bloor. So what I've circled here are all the years that Ritchie shot that area. And what I did was I said, I'm going to look at every single one of these contact sheets. So R170, RC21 to RC24, RC57, so on and so forth. I asked for everything. And what did I find? Well, I finally found the Midtown Bakery. So on contact sheet RG100, shot, and the images were shot in 1973, I found that two of the negatives contained the bakery. So the negative numbers, when I turned over the contact sheet, turned out to be RG100-2 and RG100-4. And there, with my smartphone, I was able to zero in on the Midtown Bakery. And this is actually an important observation about how, as far as I can tell, almost every archive works, where they encourage you to bring in your smartphone and take your own images. So instead of paying money on using the photocopier, just snap your own images. So long as you don't have the camera flash turned on, they will let you shoot to your heart's content. And so that's what I did in terms of generating the images that you see on this slide. I wanted to talk about a little elephant that is always in the room when we talk about contemporary photography. And this is Google Street View. And I need to make it clear, Google's great, but it doesn't represent a public institution. So Google Street View is not a public collection. And by that I mean is it's vulnerable. Google Street View may be taken down tomorrow. It may be taken down in 10 years. It may be taken down in 25 years. But I don't consider it to be a reliable source that I can dip into whenever I want to. So what I've done for some of my research projects is I've already called up the imagery that in Toronto extends back to 2007, and I've taken screenshots of all these images and parked them in folders on my hard drive. The image that I have here says, wow, at 586 Bloor, a bakery had returned by July 2009. And again, it's a powerful tool, but we have no idea that it's going to be available to us in years to come. So make use of it while you can. And how do you do it? How do you search for older images in Street View? Well, you open up Google Maps in your browser, you type in your target address in your search box. And then once you've done that, you click on the lower right-hand image beside the Street View icon. And I've got an image of that icon up here, just so you know exactly what I'm talking about in case you haven't used Street View before. So once you clicked on that image, you'll then see more dates in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And so once again, the default is the most current Street View image. In this case, 586 Bloor Street West in Toronto, shot in August 2024. And that's how I generated the previous slide. I clicked on see more dates, and I got a range of images from 2007 to the present. Let's now move into dating photos. And I'm going to start by looking at information about dates that's supplied by other people. The way I approach this is through the lens of confidence. And by that I mean is that I'm highly confident in the way that certain dates are provided, and I have less confident in the way that other dates are given to me. What do I mean by that? I have high confidence when I see dates that are associated with marked glass plate negative slides or digital watermarks, when they come from newspaper sources, when I'm associating them with a photographer's log or his or her or their metadata, and I have high confidence when I encounter copyrighted postcards. Now, going down the scale, I'm fairly confident in reproductions in old books, pamphlets, and souvenir publications when they provide me with a date, and when I see postmarked postcards. I have less confidence or low confidence when I come across handwritten notes that are on the back of prints or sometimes on the front of prints or associated with dates written in photo albums. And dating by others and secondary sources, be they books, articles, or online posts, I'm fairly skeptical, I have to admit. And so, how do I deal with this skepticism? Well, let's look at the range of confidence. So, here is a marked negative. It's a 5 by 7 inch glass plate negative created by the City of Toronto's official photographer on March 15th, 1932. Shows a sewer. The Arthur Goss, the photographer, has actually scratched the metadata into the glass plate. He's showing the general location, he's showing the date, and he's showing the topic. And this applies to tens of thousands of images that are held in the Toronto archives. In terms of newspaper sources, Here's an image that's in the Globe and Mail collection at the City Archives. And I show on the right-hand side the cataloging information that's available online. So this sewer image was created on December 24, 1925. And we know this because of the associated photographer's log that was produced by the Globe and Mail. And if you scroll down, you'll see at the bottom of this catalog record, there's a general note that says the image was actually published in the Globe on December 26, 1925. So they've actually, an archivist or a researcher has actually matched up this image with something that's actually available and was published in the newspaper. So it's a good one-to-one correspondence um, between what's in the photo collection and what's in the actual newspaper. Metadata. So here's another sewer image, this time shot by one of the city's official photographers, Jose San Juan. March 29, 2009, he created this photograph. And many of his photographs are born digital. And so this is, of course, the modern way in which the City of Toronto documents its operations, events, and activities. Copyrighted postcards. So on this postcard, usually on the front, sometimes on the back, you'll see phrases like what I've circled here. Entered according to Act of the Parliament of Canada in the year 1904 by G.L. Smith at the Department of Agriculture. Okay, so G.L. Smith is not necessarily the photographer, but the publisher. And the publisher has asserted copyright in 1904 to this image, to this entire work, quite frankly. And what is it? Well, it is the aftermath of the Toronto fire, which destroyed many blocks in downtown Toronto on April 19th, 1904. You can see corroborating all this information where the person who sent the photocard actually inscribed the date that this cousin communicated to someone else. How is Jenny there today? So on and so forth. So, once again, we also need to recognize that just because something is labeled as April 19th doesn't mean the photograph was actually made on that day. That's the day the fire broke out, but this could have been a day or two, maybe even a week or two later, before all the remains of these buildings were demolished and the city began to rebuild itself. Old commemorative and souvenir publications. Again, a rich source in these pictorial works of views of Toronto. And again, a circa warning. The publication date does not necessarily equate to the date of the photo. Again, all we know is that the publication date is the latest possible date for the image. And the wrinkle here is that many of these souvenirs produced, especially in the 19th century, would reuse photographs time and time again. And probably the photographer was making money by reselling his or her image to different publishers. So again, the cautious approach is to say the circa date is circa this or circa that. You cannot absolutely say that simply because, as you can see on the lower right-hand side, the Custom House appeared in the new album of Toronto Views, that the image was actually made in the year of publication. All you can do is to say is about or approximately. Looking at postmarked postcards, I've circled a postmark on the reverse of this postcard. And again, all we know is that the postmark date is the latest possible date this image was made at. You would have to do some supplementary research by looking at the different ages of buildings illustrated on this postcard to more closely, hopefully, define when this image was made. So again, the postmark date is not necessarily the photo date. I mentioned my skepticism about handwritten notes. And here's a case where a handwritten note was taken and used by City Archive staff to generate the catalog record. What do I mean by all this? Okay, you can see on this image, it's titled Center Island Filtration Plant 1912 question mark, and then it has a log number 6034. This is a photograph made by William James in the early 20th century. But the notes were made by his son around 1970 when the William James collection was donated to the City of Toronto Archives. So decades after his dad made this photograph, the son was having a guess at locations and dates. So, once again, handwritten notations, not necessarily the photo date. I know absolutely through my own research on the Toronto water supply system, using other textual records and image sources, this photo is no earlier than 1918. And I suspect it's probably even a bit later, but I'm going to use circa 1918. And why I say a little bit later is you can see that some soot has already accumulated at the top of the smokestack. Okay, so it was an electrically powered plant, but its backup source of fuel was coal, and that's another clue as to how I might date this photograph, but definitely circa 1918. And once again, on the right-hand side, you see the City Archives catalog record has simply carried over the information provided by the son of William James. Dating by others in secondary sources. So here again, the circa warning, the guess date, not necessarily the actual photo date. So here you're going to look for some supporting evidence. Was the image on the right-hand side shot and used for this pictorial work published in the 1970s actually datable to 1899? So we're looking at the northwest corner of Yonge and Richmond Street. There's lots of evidence. I know that the location is right, but what about the date? And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But first, I want to open up the general topic of dating photos, which is do your own research. And your objective is hopefully getting to a specific date, maybe even a specific day when something happened. But if not, an approximate date is good or a date range. And to do this, here are some really great research tools. If you click on the link to everpresent.com, you'll get a really great online guide to dating photos. EverPresent is a company that specializes in digitizing photographs, and it wants to help you date what it's digitizing. So I highly recommend visiting this online source. Spend a few minutes just so you get a sense of the issues and different research techniques to dating. At the Toronto Public Library, there are some printed sources that over the years I've used time and time again. And I think there's a half dozen I've listed here. I don't need to go into detail. But there's many others. If you search using the term photographs and genealogy, you can find many, many sources. These just happen to be my favorites. And all of these sources provide detailed information I cannot go into today about photographic methods, about photo characteristics and formats. So, whether you're dealing with a daguerreotype or a cabinet card, how thick the paper that the photo was printed on. Again, dip into these research tools. They're really, really handy and informative. What I want to do is focus on the image content of photos that you encounter. I'm looking for identifiable or datable things, and I'm going to take those and corroborate them with other primary and secondary sources. So I'll take other images, directories, maps and plans, newspapers, books, what have you, and I'll link them up to what I'm actually seeing in the photographs. And what are those things? Buildings, structures, architectural styles and details. But they also could be parks or public spaces, features like fountains when they appear, when certain plantings or gardens are put in. Signs are really important. So street and business names, advertisements, and the like. I'll also be looking for different examples of urban technology, vehicles, transit modes. Are we looking at horse-drawn streetcars? Or are we looking at electrified streetcars? What type of streetlights are present? Can we identify any notable people or events that are in the actual photograph? And then more generally, what do the people look like? What are they wearing? What is their clothing? What are their fashion accessories? And surprisingly, but critically, how is their hair being worn? And finally, I'm hoping to find information on the photograph about the photographer and their studio, their name, their address, when they won medals for their photography, anything else that I can find about who created the image. So let's dive into a few examples. Buildings and signs as a source of information. So going back to that image we saw that I came across in a secondary source, northwest corner of Yonge and Richmond West. So it was dated in the book as 1899, but I'm going to say it should actually be cited as a date range 1896 to 1898. And I knew this now by looking at the picture and using some corroborating source materials. The Simpsons building didn't arrive until 1896 at this corner. But also, I looked at who occupied the building on the corner per se. And there was even an interesting poster tacked up in the window, building coming down, come in for last minute sales. This site was vacant by 1899. The last time there was a Hatter on the site was 1898. And as a result, that's why I've narrowed down the date range for this image. Notable people and events. So this is a photograph that hung in a fancy frame at Spadina House, now a city museum, but the home of A.W. Austin, very prominent Torontonian. So the fact that it was hung in his house suggested that it was kind of a notable event. Um, and it's held by Toronto History Museums, and you can see a link here, how you get into their database. They dated the photo as 1905 to 1915 for one copy print, and then for another one, because they held two in their collection, or hold two in their collection, as circa 1910. So using newspaper and magazine sources, I was able to determine that at least three people could be identified here. A.W. Austin, who organized this tournament, George S. Lyon, Canada's Olympic champion in golf, and Mabel Thompson, Canada's ladies amateur champion. It turned out that this was a really famous mixed foursome tournament that was held on October 2nd, 1906. And you can see there's a mix of men and women as spectators. And obviously, bringing out the crowds suggested that this was a really important tournament. And indeed, George S. Lyon, he actually worked as the golf pro for the Lambton Club. And he sometimes would play with celebrities. And in 1906, it turned out to be Mabel Thompson. Science and technology, again, really, really important for drilling down on your dating exercise. This is a building known as the Wellesley Buildings at Queen and John. So, now we know it as the City TV building. Um, this photo comes from the United Church of Canada archives, and their archivists dated the photo as ranging between 1925 and 1959. And why do they estimate this? Well, the United Church of Canada was an amalgamation of religious institutions, and it got going in 1925. Put up this tablet marked by the arrow. But in 1955, 1959, they moved elsewhere in the city. Now, I married that information with my research on Toronto parking meters, which is the other arrow down here. Parking meters first appear in Toronto in 1952, so we could better cite the date for this image as 1952 to 1959. Clothing, hairstyles, and photographer imprints. So this is an image mounted within a cardboard frame held by the Toronto Metropolitan University Archives and Special Collections, simply called Portrait of Woman with Violin. We don't know who this woman is, but what do we know? Well, there is an imprint and it says Barrett Studio. And we know that Barrett operated in Toronto from 1901 to 1925. So right away, that gives us a good idea of when this image was made. Now, a caveat about studios. Sometimes, and even today, they will take older images and make a copy print for you. So in other words, the copy print may be dated, say, 2025, but it may be a copy print of an image that was originally created in 1925. So sometimes I wonder about immediately jumping to dating an image just on the operating dates for the studio that appears to have created it. But what we do know and why TMU dates this photo as circa 1920 is this woman's clothing and hairstyle. There's no way it is before the First World War. And so the bobbed hairstyle, the way that the dress is hung, her sleeves, this is a case where using information about clothing and hairstyles um, is able to narrow down the date range. So here, I would actually date it as circa 1920 to 1925 because Barrett is out of business in that last year. And again, it provides a greater sense of certainty rather than saying circa 1920. So over the course of the session, I hope I've introduced you to what I call the thrill of the search. You can become your own forensic photograph detective by applying some of the lessons I hope you've learned here today. So once again, we've got 586 Bloor Street West. Only found one old image of it before 2007. But what it did was it taught me the importance of delving into many different archives and sources. And I've listed all these on the right hand of the screen. So really to close off this session, I want to point up the importance of what I've highlighted in red here, the Ontario Jewish Archives and the Canadian Jewish News. And that's again because the Krebs, who operated the Midtown Bakery for a time, were Jewish. So again, delve into some of those more specialized ethno-racial archives that may have information about your target of your research. The Canadian Jewish News is a publication that's available online through Simon Fraser University Library. And why it's important, even though it appears to be national in scope, that publication was published in Toronto and had a ton of Toronto information contained within it. And so even though I didn't find anything about the Krebs or the Midtown Bakery, it did expose me to the importance of using some of those specialized sources. I'm going to open it up for questions and comments now. But first, before you pose those questions through the chat functionality here, I want to try to answer a question that came in just before this session started. And so someone who's associated with a downtown church, Church of the Holy Trinity, which you may know is the tiny church nestled against the west side of the Eaton Center. They asked, well, we understood that this used to be a really, richly diverse neighborhood. How do I find photos of recreational activities that may have happened in that area? And this actually turned out to be a fairly easy answer at a broad level. And what I mean by that was I was able to point immediately to two really great secondary sources that have been created over the past 10 years. Two books about the ward, which is what the neighborhood bounded by University Avenue, College, Yonge, and Queen was known as. Started off as Macaulay Town in the 1830s as an immigrant reception area and went from being the home of Toronto's Irish population to being a place where Blacks, Jews, Italians, and Chinese people resided. So, in these two books, as am going to point out to the questioner, you will find a ton of background information about those different cultural groups and what their everyday lives were within the ward. You'll find out what the streets were within the ward. You'll learn about the public facilities like the Elizabeth Street Playground, community institutions, be they Jewish, Black, Chinese, what have you, and some of the commercial attractions like Shea's Hippodrome, set up as a vaudeville house and then later a place where you would go and watch moving pictures. And that way you can take those targets and do your photo research. So start with your secondary sources, get a feel for the neighborhood, and then drill down deeper in some of those sources that I've seen. So good luck, enjoy the search. This ghost map, again, is of the ward. I've circled where the church is. So the person who posed the question to me is going to look for streets, some of which no longer even exist today, because much of the ward over time was cleared to make way for schools, for hospitals, and even two city halls, what we call Old City Hall, and then in the 1960s, New City Hall. So again, enjoy your research. It's fun. You may find lots of interesting topics that you want to research further as a result of dipping into these sources. And I guarantee it'll expand your love for Toronto history. Thanks very much.